I'd like to initially start off with acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands in which we meet today and pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging. The EDSN, or the Eastern Disabilities Steering Network, aims to provide informative and up-to-date information and topical discussions to assist providers and the disability sector. Today's topic is certainly going to be an interesting one and an informative one. I once heard an executive director walk into a meeting and just announce to everyone, some of you aren't playing nicely in the playground. If you don't start playing nicely, I'm going to separate you and deal with you individually. Playing nicely and including everyone is something our parents and teachers have been promoting for generations. So why is it when we're promoting inclusion, participation and engagement, we as service providers and agencies are not always on the same page? Similar to an events coordinator or a project manager coordinating a team of people to achieve an outcome, why are we not working effectively as a team with our participants to achieve the result or outcome they're looking for? Thus the title for our session today. So I'd like to thank the panel members for giving up their time today and providing their experiences, the EDSN committee for organising the session, and to you all for attending. And for now, it's over to Steve, who's going to MC for today, and for what will surely be an interesting and unpacking and discussion by everyone. So thank you all and enjoy.
Thank you, Hugh, and good morning, everyone. My name is Steve Lowe. I am with Hugh, a member of the Eastern Disabilities Services Network Steering Committee. This is our first webinar for this year. We hope to have a couple more before Christmas, and we're actually hoping to have a live event in December, but we will cross our fingers and see how we go with that. As well as being on the EDSN, I work for the Boosting Local Care Workforce program. I'm the South East Melbourne and Gippsland coordinator, and my role in that program is to provide support and resources and networking to current and potential NDIS providers, and to feed back regional issues and provider issues to the department. Joining me this morning, we have Tony Van Hammond, VICTAS Director of Provider Engagement for NDIA, Simon Christopher, the Director for the NDIS Quality Safeguards Commission in Victoria and Tasmania, and Philippa Angley, the National Policy Manager for National Disability Services. Before we jump into the discussion and questions, I'm going to ask each panel member to introduce themselves and their role, what they like about their role, and what their biggest challenge is. So, I'm still looking. Simon, shall we start with you?
Thanks, Steve. Good morning, everyone. As Steve mentioned, my name's Simon Christopher. I'm the State Director for the NDIS Quality and Safeguards Commission in Victoria. I've been in this role for around 12 months. I've been a part of the Commission since pre its conception on the 1st of July 2018, and held a role in national office for the first couple of years of operation. I think the exciting part of my role is bringing together the functions of an integrated regulator for the to achieve better outcomes in safeguarding for NDIS participants. I think some of the challenges that continue to be faced is, as a pretty new regulator, we've got a number of things that we're still ironing out and learning from the evidence that we've accumulated over our near first 3 years of operations. So we'll continue to work and improve on that, but also getting that understanding. Yep.
That was my fault, Simon. I've muted you. You need to unmute your phone. No, that was me. I was muting somebody else, and I muted your phone line accidentally. If you pick your phone up, you should be able to unmute it or press the.
Okay, now I can. The little man had to tell me that it was *6, so it's a morning of technical challenges, I can assure everyone. Yeah, so look, I think the challenges that are in front of us, there are some internal ones, and we'll continue to work through those. more broadly, I think it's really useful to everyone to understand that there's been a real change in the operating model. This is the first time that there's been this type of integrated regulator nationally to improve quality of supports being delivered to NDIS participants. So really, to that end, I think the real challenge ahead is to ensure that people are aware of those obligations and how best to implement them, and you know, support those NDIS participants that they engage with to the best of their ability.
Thank you. Tony, your turn.
Hi everybody, and thanks Steve, and to the network for having this event today. So my role as Director of Provider Engagement is to support providers to try and work in and understand the scheme. So it's no easy feast. I've been involved in the agency since 2013. There's a very few of us that are still there from the very beginning, so I am a dinosaur. I came in, I've got a very strong mental health background, and came to the scheme thinking I was doing a role that I've never done. I think, what do I like about the role? Look, it depends what day you ask me. To be honest, it's a tough gig, and I'm being really honest. And, you know, my team and I, we do try to be honest communicators to inform the network and providers, and to support providers to navigate the NDIS. The biggest challenge, I think, is the change and the ever-changing world, and also to try and get the practice to align with process. And that is also a well-known challenge as well. So I try and be an honest communicator. I try and ensure that, you know, a spade's a spade, and do acknowledge that we cause headaches. But, you know, look, you know, and you may all want to shoot me down for this, but, you know, I actually do feel that in principle, what we are trying to do is make the best outcomes for participants. We are all there for participants, no matter what role the participant is. What drives me, and I know it drives all of you. And, you know, I have the utmost respect for the provider network in regards to what is being done. And I think we have seen really good results for participants, at the same time acknowledging the challenges that the scheme brings. That's probably enough, Steve.
And Philippa.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Philippa Angley. I'm Head of Policy at National Disability Services. Tony said that she's a dinosaur, so I'm not sure what I am, because I'm coming up for 16 years at NDS. And what do I like about my job? I'm actually an OT by training, and then did public policy studies. So for me, working in the disability sector over the last 16 years has been a wonderful place for somebody who loves policy, because there was all the work leading up to the NDIS, and after 8 years of working with the agency, DSS and others to implement that. What I really like about my job is knowing that what I do for members ultimately flows down to their desire to improve services to people with disability. So my role enables me to remain connected to people with disability, which as an old OT is something that's important to me. I'll leave it there so that we can maximise the amount of time we have to discuss the issues that are concerning you.
Wonderful, thank you. And I forgot the housekeeping at the beginning, which is please make sure you're on mute because it will cause some disturbance, and it's up to participants as attendees whether they want their cameras on or not. We do like to make this interactive. If you do have questions as we go through the discussion, feel free to put them in chat. If we don't get to them live, we will follow up and get questions answered. So do feel free, if we're not covering some areas that you want discussed, to use the chat function to do that. So what's interesting is that all of you really in what drives you and what you like about your position was the participant focus, that we're here to be part of people with a disability in Australia who have access to the NDIS to increase their social and economic participation. So we're all, whether we work for the NQSC with Simon or the NDIA or in NDS or whether we're active providers, we all recognise the participant as the centre of their care. And that's core design of the NDIA. So in relation to that, and if we have a service system which recognises that at its core, what are the barriers and enablers for an effective service system that has a participant or a person with a disability at the core of that service system?
Steve, it's Tony. I think some of the challenges are, I still believe that there is still at times some difficulty understanding the old world and the new world, and that transferring of, you know, the block funding and, you know, a sort of a contained model versus that transactionary, and it is now a competitive market. And there is some, many providers have, you know, progressed into that space, but I still think it challenges many. And, you know, only yesterday I was on a meeting, and, you know, the issues that were tabled to the agency actually weren't agency issues. They were issues with the delivery of the role of support coordination and what the support coordinator should do. So it's about understanding the scope and the role within a really bigger picture of what is being delivered. So rather than just one provider being that person's support, there could be 6 providers, and knowing who does what and how do they interlink, it is a real challenge. So that's my sort of starting conversation.
I might jump in there. I always sort of, I guess, am a bit flummoxed by how we develop such a complex system. You know, we had the opportunity to start afresh, and we have created something with so many moving parts, and that people with disability may have to come into contact with a surprising number of people before they actually get to their supports on the ground. So I think we've got to acknowledge that we failed on some of the design issues. We made it a very complex thing for people with disability and their families to understand. Service providers also have had struggled to understand it. But then on top of that, I think there is the need to acknowledge the pressure that was put on everyone to roll this out quickly. And so that things were put into place that were always going to be changed somewhere down the track. And I think we're seeing some of those, potentially the agency working on really that scheme work of the future and how all of these moving parts fit together. So our providers, people with disability and families are dealing with constant changes, and keeping up with that information is really quite hard. And finally, I'll say that I think that over time, I hope that the sometimes disconnect I see between the agency, commission, service providers, participants, that we can minimise, you know, some of that. So, you know, if a participant has had an unauthorised restrictive practice used on them, and there's a decision they need, the development of a behaviour support plan, how to get the funding for that into the plan really quickly, how to get the behaviour support practitioner on the ground to develop that plan quickly. So I think we can, over time, improve some of those connections.
So Simon, given those complexities of the market and what Tony and Philip were saying about it is complex, it's large. I mean, this is pretty much the most ambitious consumer-directed care program in the world. I mean, in England, you had the choice to opt in. You could say with block funding, it's around all scope of services that affect the person. It's the largest geographic area of a jurisdiction. I mean, we have pretty much been more ambitious than anyone else, any other country. As the man overseeing for Victoria, Tasmania, the quality and the safeguarding of this scheme, how do you think it's going in relation to the effective service system?
Thanks, Dave. Look, I think it's a really important point that both Tony and Philippa have made. And the point I would make to sort of round that out a bit is that the real enabler going forward, I think, is the empowerment of the consumer. So the choice and control of the participant at the centre of that is primary to, we have a lot of intersections with that very issue where a participant isn't necessarily either supported in that choice of control, understand it as well as they should, which then causes a disconnect in the complaint space, for instance. So, but I think that's really central to how this model will evolve and move forward, and its success is, to the extent that we can empower those consumers to actually exercise that choice and control right. And as Philippa points out, it is a complex the continuum of supports from, a product-based through to, pretty complex care setting is vast. And we absolutely see that from the type of complaints, etc. we get. So I think there is that piece of empowerment central to its success. But I also think that we will, as the funding streams settle, as the participants are, largely all now transitioned in with WA coming on the 1st of December last year, we'll start to get a model of supports for people that will settle over time, and we will get better at the behaviour support practitioner to get into a plan for a participant where there's an unauthorised use of a restrictive practice. So again, there's some work there as we work with our state colleagues around, some definitions, etc. on, the particular types of restrictive practices. There is some variability between each of the state and territory jurisdictions, and the Commission sets its national reporting requirements around unauthorised restrictive practices.
So
I think there's a time is probably the barrier.
I think the time's a barrier, but I'd also like to go back to something Philippa was saying, that it's around the complexity. I mean, the Commission and the NDIA, because I think when people talk about the NDIS, I think about a piece of fantastic legislation. When I think about the government agency who is assisting to implement the legislation, I think about the NDIA, but the NDIA and the NQSC, you guys have fantastic websites. All of the information is there. When it goes to complexity, the NDIA have a market enablement framework that states how they're going to work with providers and assess the market. Simon, the NQSC's website has some excellent information on behaviour support and restrictive practices. The issue is the navigation. As Philippa was saying, the complexity. Does anyone have some tips about how providers can find the information when they need to? So someone's had to have an unauthorised restrictive practice, for example. Philippa, what's your thoughts on this? Because I agree with you about the complexity, but the information's there, but we don't know how to find it.
I have a plea for the agency, and early on in the scheme, changes were made to the website and we had no visibility of it. And then they kindly put the bottom left-hand side of the screen as you look into it on their website. They've got recent updates. Unfortunately, it only holds, 10 or 15 changes. Now, when they're getting, when they put up, say, news of multiple events, that you can lose, you can't see that they, before you've looked, they have made these important changes but the only recent changes that are showing up are all the events. So if you could extend the ability to, for people who look at that regularly, so they can see, oh, they've changed something in the operating guidelines, I need to go in there and have a look would be really useful because, as I say, the short list that is on the website just gets, the important changes get drowned in information about events. So if Tony could fix that for me, I'd be really happy.
Tony, what are your thoughts on that?
Mine?
Providers finding information.
The website probably reflects all of the components of the scheme. And look, the website has improved. Is there room for improvement? Yes, there is. I'll take Philippa's feedback, you know, but you know, I still get amazed, you know, when we run events, people say, well, how do we find out about it? Well, there's a news and events page. So there is no easy answer to, you know, navigate. If you want operational guidelines, you know, you use the search bar, etc. And I'm not trying to be condescending, but, you know, I'm just not sure, you know, what other advice I can give. There is a lot of information to share. So how do we make the best of it? But, you know, I think Philippa's point, and I can email that up, you know, to that department, you know, and give that advice, whether it's, you know, listened to or actioned is always up for review.
And
the other thing I'll just add to that is that by going to that page, it will tell you where somebody who's made a systems change, the page that has occurred on, but it won't tell you what has changed on that page. So you can't easily see that, look, they've put up this bit of information about independent assessments is new. You just get taken to the independent assessment page. So for a provider to remain on top of all the changes coming through, it is really, really hard because we don't get those regular updates about those important changes that they may want to keep on top of. I spend a lot of time searching and playing in that website, trying to remember what was there last week.
Yeah, look, I check the bottom left-hand corner of the NDIA's website. I check it twice a day, morning, but when I start work, when I finish work. I know to do that. And I think, Tony, what sort of tips would you have for providers if they need some information to assist them in the market? Where do they go first? How do they find it? How do they know there's an events page apart from just sitting on the website for hours and looking?
Well, at the top of the website, there is a news and events, you know, heading, I suppose. So, you know, it sort of says news and events will be listed under there. Then there's a drop down. I just wanted to make a comment because I see Colin in the chat has said about the, you know, find a provider. Absolutely, it's horrible. And if you actually look now, you won't be able to see it because it's been taken down. The lists have been taken down and we're just about to embark on a new provider finder, which will be a lot richer and easier. I've had some staff involved in the testing. So totally acknowledge that, Colin. And part of the improvement is a better. It'll probably be launched while I'm on holidays, but it will be a lot better and easier, and you can do it down to an LGA and outlets, etc., which reminds me of why it's important for providers to ensure their links with the commission, etc., updated, because that will feed into our find a provider.
Simon, let's pick on your website now.
Sure.
You've got a good search tool, but we can't see too many updates. But we don't necessarily have to talk about that. What are your tips for providers accessing information through your website and through the commission?
Look, Steve, to that point, we have created a provider information pack that can be accessible from our website under the provider. You can hover over the NDIS providers menu page. There's providers, participants, and a couple of others, I think about us, etc. It will include materials. You can also order a printed copy if you wish, but that will include information on the code of conduct, practice standards, behaviour support, including positive behaviour support capability framework, which is relevant to practitioners, complaints and incident management, provider registration, and the NDIS worker screening check. We are also undertaking a review of the website this year, so there is an opportunity for providers to be involved in some of the testing around that and their inputs, and we're looking to do that in June. So if there are
So if I'm a new provider, and Philippa spoke of the traditional providers still transitioning from block funding, and I completely agree with her. It's certainly a work in progress. But if I'm a brand new provider and I hop onto your website and I'm trying to make a business decision about whether I'm registered or unregistered, what would your tips be for me there?
So, I mean, again, I think there's it'll be very driven by those participants that you're seeking to support and the types of supports that you're looking to deliver. There's only 3 mandated registration groups, being specialist disability accommodation, if you are undertaking functional assessments or writing behaviour support plans, and then also if you're implementing restrictive practices as part of authorised regulated restrictive practices as part of a behaviour support plan. So, which that's a really interesting one to understand well, because if you are a provider who is implementing for regulated restrictive practice as part of a plan, you're required to be registered irrespective of what registration group that you're delivering. So that will broaden obviously the registration requirements, but you know, it'll depend if you are supporting a marketplace that of self-managing participants. There may be, you know, a business decision that you don't need to register. There are 2 pathways for registration as well. There's the verification pathway for a set of registration groups versus the more larger full service, if you like, provider that will go through a certification path. So it's a very difficult question to answer without.
It is now, Simon, we've had the key question on registration put in the chat already, which is as we know when you go, and so thank you for the person from iSport Australia, when you go for registration, whether it be certification or verification, you have your audit, and then the second part of the registration process is the internal suitability assessment that the Commission does, and that Commission, that suitability assessment asks. So someone spent, if they've done a certification audit, they've spent 8 to 10 grand on the audit, they've spent 8 to 10 grand internally writing their policies. They've got clients who want them to be their implementing provider, they're saying out of business. They're waiting 8 to 12 months for the internal suitability assessment. Is there any work in the Commission around how to either streamline that suitability assessment or maybe make it part of the audit process or something? Because this has got to be the key thing you hear every day, that people don't like the waiting period for suitability assessments.
Yeah, look, we are absolutely doing a lot of work internally around how we can streamline those processes of the suitability assessment. So it's what I would say, if there are Victorian providers that are new to market and there's an impact on them being able to get access to that market based on the registration assessment, and it's been a reasonable period of time after the audit, then I do want to hear about that, and I'm happy to take that up with my national colleagues where registration sits and try and move those forward as best we can. I would highlight though, where there's no change in the all providers transitioned into Victoria on the 1st of July 2019 that were already existingly registered with the NDIA. So where you've gone through your renewal audit and there's no real change to your service profile, there's no actual impact on market there. So we'll continue to work through those applications as a secondary priority to those that are impacting market. and impacting the support delivery to participants that need those supports.
And it is a key issue of providers, and I know Philip has been keen to speak on this too, so I'll pass over to her.
I won't speak on what Simon has been speaking about, because I'm sure the Commission knows all the problems associated with completing that process. What I wanted to point out is that the NDIS commissioned NDS to develop resources around risks, incidents and complaint management for small providers, sole practitioners and medium-sized providers. Those resources are getting close to completion, and then we will be rolling them out through webinars and the like. And so that will be promoting them heavily. So the Commission, I think, understands that the decisions for smaller providers on whether they register or not are very closely caught up in their concerns around managing risks, incidents and complaints appropriately. They've got a new provider, has so much to get their head around, and I hope this set of resources will actually help them understand that and hopefully think about undertaking registration with the Commission rather than being an unregistered provider. So watch out for those seminars.
Why do you hope that there's more registered than unregistered providers?
NDS has always been concerned that unregistered providers do not have to have their workers screened. The worker clearance isn't necessary for many of the tasks. We are in the midst of a Royal Commission, and next week the hearings around the NDIS and service providers will start, and I think it's going to be probably a pretty rough ride, is my guess. There'll be 2 weeks of hearings, a week apart, and if I look at what happened with the Aged Care Royal Commission, those commissioners were very focused on inadequate sort of safeguarding and for workers. And actually in the budget last week, funding was made available to introduce a consistent worker screening across aged care and disability, and they're going to do the work to have the same code of conduct applying to all those workforces. So I guess I'm a fan of at least a worker clearance being undertaken for workers working with participants in the scheme.
Simon.
Thanks, Dave. Philippa, I might just follow up on that point around the requirement for a screening check for workers in a registered space as opposed to an unregistered space. I think it's important just to flag, and it goes back a little bit to that empowerment point that I talked to earlier for participants. Where a participant is self-managing, they can absolutely require a support worker who's delivering supports to them to go through the worker screening clearance check. So that is open to them, and as can unregistered providers, they can still access that check process. So it's just interesting to keep that in mind, that is available to them. And I just want to make one other point around, which I probably should have wrapped off in the registration comment about some delays. It's of note that in the October budget of last year, the Commission received significant funding and a resourcing uplift to resource to the front line based on the learnings of our first 2.5 years. So that's a pretty unprecedented resource uplift in such a new regulatory body, and I think it goes to the fact of the job we have at hand, and the resourcing profile that we started off with in 2018 may not have been, because we're quite a unique regulator without sort of comparables in all the jurisdictions, or with parts of our functions in some jurisdictions, but they were quite separated. So it's a recognition of the need to resource to this. So I'm confident that going forward we will start to see some much better turnarounds than what we may have experienced in our early days.
Thank you. And look, I want to go back to make sure people saw that Tony put in the chat a reminder to subscribe to the provider update emails, and I think that's an essential tip in keeping up to date. And one of the interesting things around the registered and unregistered discussion, and we've got more to talk about today than just this, is that the NDIS market is not homogenous. So a friend of mine who's a wheelchair user says, Steve, I can choose my own plumber and I can choose my own worker. I don't need them registered. So, and one of the things we know is that we have fixed, when we move to fixed and flexible or verified and certified audits, is that there are people that do need a regulated, supported, quality checked response to their support needs. And then there are people who are NDIS participants who don't. I mean, Tony, is that an extra complexity around the market when talking to expectations for both participants and providers, that we're actually not that homogenous? Maybe we do need both registered and unregistered, or?
Yeah, look, I think we need a combination, but I think, like Philip is saying, some oversight in regards to, what we're seeing is also something that's really key. One of the, I think is a good development, well, certainly from my perspective in regards to what's out in the market, is now the ABN capturing from plan managers. Because I utilise that data regularly in regards to understanding who is getting, paid and for what services. So, if we look like we're going to potentially have an exit, I can identify what participants are linked to that provider via a plan manager. Now, there's still a gap for self-management, but, whether that changes, who knows? But certainly that oversight in regards to who is getting paid for what is going to be absolutely essential data for us moving forward, and what I think will only develop in regards to how we use that.
Philippa or Simon, anything to add to this, the registration market discussion?
I would be quite interested in Simon's perspective about the announcements in the federal budget that see, go back a step. We know DSS is working on a national disability workforce plan, and it will be released very soon. And the phrase within that plan and all the discussion around it is the care and support workforce. So, and it is looking increasingly at bringing together the ageing and disability workforces, I think, like making them, the requirements around them more similar than they currently are. And we've got specific information in the federal budget that is aligning the worker screening and code of conduct and improved, and the same register of workers. And so I'm interested in what Simon can, I guess, tell us about that.
Thanks, Philippa. I'm just checking on, I'm off mute. Look, I think, it's early days. It is just a budget announcement. So, but I think we are really, if I go back to part of the considerations when worker screening was set up for the NDIS, it was really about a negative licensing system, or if you like, of those support workers, because I think we're all familiar with the stories of employees or workers who have done this horrible thing over in this setting of a provider in one particular regional location or in one particular jurisdiction, and they've popped up in another jurisdiction down the track and committed some other terrible act. And the regulatory environment prior to the fully portable national worker screening clearance didn't cater for that. So, I mean, I think government is making statements now around a single code of conduct to cover that care workforce, and are having progressing discussions around how what's now in the NDIS and the worker screening clearance space may be able to be more broadened to ensure that we've got a single set of checks that manage that care workforce. So how that looks and how it's operationalised obviously are ongoing conversations that will roll out over the coming months and years, but there was an allocation, as Philippa says, in last week or the week before's budget around to go to that work. So I think it's a bit of a watch this space as to what that looks like moving forward. But you know, from my own view, I think it's a great step forward. You know, if you are, as we know, as we learnt during COVID-19, a lot of people are working in aged care settings and disability settings through multiple sort of shift arrangements, and it was something that we needed to manage and understand well during that time, so that there was that, you know, transference of infection, etc., risk that was needed to be managed and understood.
And I mean, also in the budget and the Royal Commission for Aged Care, Simon, was the creation of a Quality Safeguards Commission for Aged Care. So if they're going to look at streamlining your care workforce, so we're going to have the two commissions, and many providers I speak with are in aged care and DVA and NDIA. They've got the DVA requirements, the aged care requirements and NDIS requirements. Are we going to end up with a second Quality Safeguards Commission, or do you reckon they're going to combine it and you guys are about to get bigger?
Firstly, I think that question's way above my pay grade.
Oh, it's above all our pay grades, but you know, I speak to providers every day who are saying it's hard enough. I've got 2 worker screenings that are costing me hundreds and hundreds of dollars, and the workers can't navigate it. Now I'm going to have 2 commissions, and they're trying to increase the market. Yeah,
so I mean, I think I would just answer that broadly, Steve, in the sense that there is an existing aged care quality and safeguarding commission, and they have been around in their current iteration from around, I think it was the 1st of January 2019, I believe, which brought together a number of their functions from out of health, where their complaints commissioner sat, and have effectively started to create an integrated regulatory model. Going forward as to what that looks like over time, I would be purely speculating to suggest I would have any insight to that. That'll be a decision for government down the track. I think what we are seeing though is much more alignment around, you know, the worker screening check and utilising that opportunity. So where there is overlap between those workforces, it's minimised sort of regulatory impact. And there is some work that was also announced in that budget around, you know, where providers are in the 2 spaces of disability and aged care, that alignment of those regulatory requirements to the extent they can. So obviously that's work that's very new, and, you know, I would be speculating to go into that any further at this stage.
Yeah, it's fun to speculate live on camera though, Simon.
That's right. In a recorded session, it's probably not the one I'll do. But anyway.
No, exactly. But you know, we've got to ask. Tony, I'm going to put you under the spotlight now for your crystal ball gazing. I mean, with the NDIA, we know that we've got the move from core capital capacity to fixed flexible type with IAs. We know that there's how to have an even more flexible market, which this will do, and still being able to have some balance on reasonable and necessary and goal attainment in as well as choice and control. Like Simon, there's a whole lot we either don't know that or you can't say, but what's your crystal ball gazing in relation to the marketplace for providers? What should we be thinking about and watching on? What do you think is going to happen? We're going to make you earn your holidays.
Well, I've earned them. I don't know how to answer that, Steve. You know, I'm going to be really honest. I really don't know. I think, you know, I still don't think we're using the data enough to tell us what and where the need is. And, you know, diversifying that, you know, service provision. We still have thin markets in Victoria. How do we ensure that everybody has equitable access to supports? How do we ensure the outcomes that are delivered are what we wanted for the participant? How do we ensure choice and control is in line with reasonable and necessary decisions? How do we ensure that the system network links and coordinates and works as one? I don't know. So, sorry, I've probably tabled more questions than answers, but I don't think any of us really have clear answers. But I think collectively, and this is where this sort of forum is really, you know, really invaluable, is to have those honest discussions. How do we ensure participants in Victoria as a whole are working and are getting the supports and needs that they require?
Thank you. Philippa, did you have any more to add to this stream?
I might jump into just part of it, and that was your comments around increased plan flexibility, and that earlier this year the agency had a consultation paper out on, well, they had 3 out. One was on the use of independent assessments for access decisions. One was on planning policy and plan flexibility, and the other was on the ECEI reset. I think there is quite a lot of enthusiasm among providers and participants for greater plan flexibility. And I think we saw participants during COVID, when they were given more plan flexibility, some of them grabbed it with both hands and ran. You know, they were doing different things with their funding. So I think there's an appetite there among participants for greater plan flexibility. But what I'm hearing from the agency is the introduction of that is tied up somewhat with independent assessments. So in a meeting I was in last week with the Minister, she made it clear that at this point in time, her plan is still to introduce independent assessments with legislation being, an exposure draft of legislation being out later this year. From another source, I'm hearing that's probably around about October, and that will cover independent assessments, determinations of reasonable and necessary, and the framework that will allow the participant service guarantee to be contained within the legislation. The decisions around reasonable and necessary, in part, I think, are somewhat connected to the plan flexibility. So at the moment, when they're building plans, they're building the plans based on almost different types of support. And what they would like to do, as explained by Martin Hoffman and the Minister last week, was really to move away from that determination almost line by line and then adding up the budget to making a budget allocation and giving participants much greater flexibility in how they use their funds. So I don't think we'll see major changes to that plan flexibility until they determine how and if and how independent assessments, you know, will be used, and how that will be reflected in the exposure draft and of legislation, and then in finalised changes to the Act. So I think it's moving fast. The Minister's listening closely to a lot of participants, advocates, families, providers, academics on independent assessments. She is committed to their introduction, but she's clearly listening to, you know, is there something that about how this was described to be introduced and used that can be moderated to make it more palatable to players. So watch this space. The new Minister seems to be, given that she's only been in her portfolio 6 or 7 weeks, her knowledge of the NDIS already is really quite impressive, and she seems to be very committed to talking with people. So she's out and about a lot, and you know, I wouldn't be surprised if she finds a way to you know, moderate how independent assessments might be used before she goes down the exposure draft. But that's reading the tea leaves.
Look, thank you, and thank so far all of you for the very honest conversation we're having. I want to have a look at Rachel's comment in the chat, which in essence is saying that there is a financial and market inequity on registered providers against unregistered providers, because yes, the NDIS price is a ceiling, but there isn't a floor. And in thin markets, and I live in Outer Gippsland, our utilisation rate is 53%, including SIL. I live and work in a very thin market. We're on the bottom 8 utilisation regions in the whole country. Does the extra compliance and lack of pricing or market incentives for registered providers, does it put them at a back foot, as Rachel's saying? And are there other triggers or things we can look at around this?
I might jump into that one, Steve. So I think there's a couple of points I'd make, and I probably didn't cover off the categories of why you need to be registered in its entirety previously. Where a participant is managed, whose plan is managed by the agency, so an agency managed plan, they need to engage a registered provider. So there's a market question there of access to market for providers that make that form part of their business decision. And I think the other one that I would point I'd make is around sort of the quality proposition that comes with registration. I mean, I think, you know, where I'd like to see market at a point, and it comes back to this empowerment of participants point as well, is that a participant gravitates to a provider who is registered with the Commission, understanding what that means for that registration. So the expectations are embedded into that organisation and tested, and that they have the appropriate, you know, incident management systems and complaint management systems to ensure that they are receiving a quality support. So they're probably the two main. Yep.
So there's those drivers, Simon, but you know, let's face it, I think it's 20% or less of participants are agency managed, and without extra sort of pricing incentives. I mean, and there are some such TCP for provisional providers.
You're breaking up a little bit, Steve. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. So there are those sort of quality and market assurance incentives, given a thin market, and given that not all participants are going to shop with those quality assurance requirements as top of their list. Are there, whether it's other mechanisms or other things we can look at in relation to supporting the registered market that does have extra compliance and pricing costs?
Look, I think it goes back to a bit of Philippa's point earlier. The Commission does engage in an annual grant program to assist providers with the registration process. But I think, you know, the point you make, and I think Rachel's followed that up with the majority of her participants plan and self-manage. Well, I mean, that very much feeds into that business decision around registration. We think it is a worthwhile exercise for participants to go through our registration process. They get our provider newsletters, they'll get all of the contact and information. But I think conversely as well, it's important to remember that if a provider chooses not to register and is an unregistered provider, that there is still requirements to attach to them. The Commission can still take action, can take complaints, can hold a provider to account against the code of conduct, and if that's proven, then at the top end of the pyramid, if you like, the provider can be banned from delivering any supports to people with disability in nationally. So there is a number of tools to be able to regulate the unregistered provider market, but of course we are very much of that. The intrinsic value proposition of registration and how it presents to market is part of how we want to engage. And I think if you look at the standards and the quality indicators, all of that is a construct of participant-centric support delivery, and then how you, in the guideline space, how you might operationalise that or demonstrate that to an audit market. But the Commission is continually looking for those opportunities, similar to the thing that Philippa mentioned, that guidance material for smaller providers, whether it be in complaints management or incident management, to help this market mature and grow and be a high quality support delivery.
Thank you, and I'd certainly just like to reinforce what Emily has said in the chat, that many unregistered providers are builders or therapeutic support or therapeutic professionals, OTs, and so they have a whole lot of other professional registration. Tony, I want to talk a bit about language at the moment, because we know that, say, for example, the NDIA guidelines might say support coordinators or employment support providers should be registered, but we know that they don't have to be registered. There does seem to be a preference within both the agency and the Commission on providers gaining registration. Is that a fair assumption on my part?
It's a choice.
Yes.
I think makes it easier if we know who's out there and doing what, but some of our systems, like I mentioned, the plan management is also starting to give us that information. So it's about, what avenues and what tools have we got, such as the ABM, to identify who's out there. Emily's right. There are some excellent unregistered providers, and many of them are allied health. Many of them are providing high quality services. Are they better than a registered, etc.? They're different in the sense of, legislation and compliance, but the outcomes are still, similar alike for participants. So I think it's more about knowing who's out there. Like, again, if I get a call and Tony, can you pick up the call and, find out this from some of your relationship managers, I know who to call, and majority of them are registered. It's not knowing the unregistered. How do we work with them? How do we empower them? And how do we know what they're doing and the challenges they've got from an unregistered perspective? When the provider finder comes out, it will only be for registered. There are some negatives as well in regards to marketing and the tools, etc. So, yeah, it's again, no easy answer, Steve. I'm not trying to avoid, it's just, it is that.
Yeah, there is no easy answer. Philippa.
I'm an avid watcher of Royal Commissions. So, I watched the institutional responses to child sexual abuse, watched the Banking Royal Commission, the aged care one, and now the disability one. In none of those sort of systems under review did the recommendations include like winding back regulation. They were all going in the opposite direction, raising the bar, making all providers, organisations working in these systems improve their processes and often strengthening regulation. So I think we need to watch what happens in the Disability Royal Commission and see what flows from that in terms of how the Royal Commission respond to things like the new regulator and how well or not they believe those functions are occurring. So I think we've got a new regulator and we've got a Disability Royal Commission. So I'm guessing that we'll see probably some changes, over the next few years in how all this works.
Well, thank you. And if attendees could make sure they're on mute, unless the joke is really good and we all want to hear it. Rachel, no need to apologise. We're a broad church having a respectful conversation. And it is an interesting and complex place we're in, with registered and unregistered core and capital implementing providers, thin markets, whatever other size markets there are. Tony, you and your team, your job is provider engagement. You're talking to us all the time. and you're certainly hearing from us all the time, what are the key things you want to tell us? Apart from read the price guide.
Which will be hopefully released the week of the 1st of June, sort of that first week. So, you know, let's hit that question on the head. Do I know anything about what's going to be in the price guide? No, I don't. I think it's, you know, it's going to be, well, I won't be reading it until I get back from leave, may I say. But, you know, it'll be something that we'll all be waiting for with bated breath. What do I want to say?
Because you've got a unique perspective, because you engage with providers every day and you work for the agency.
Yes, yeah, double-edged sword.
Absolutely.
Look, I think, you know, I want to acknowledge, and for those that I work with regularly, acknowledge that, you know, many of your frustrations are because of practice issues, and very much what our team is doing is getting that evidence, feeding it up, and, you know, explaining to, you know, our service delivery colleagues that many of the issues that are being caused is because staff aren't following our practice guidelines, you know, and that is an open and honest fact. And it's about how do we make it easier for our service delivery staff. I'm not going to make excuses. I think they've got a hell of a job, but at the same time, they need to understand the impact in regards to the provision of services to a participant. One of my big mantras, and I'm sure they'll have me in my farewell card when I decide to leave, is that, you know, yes, Tony, that, you know, the scheme is the scheme, and without a good provider, the scheme is a piece of paper. And so that's my mantra to service delivery, is that, yes, we are all here for the participant. So, you know, we capture the evidence. You talked in your introduction and, you know, sort of earlier, you know, SIL is a big pain point. So what we've been doing, SIL and SDA, you know, not getting service bookings, not understanding the communication about the roster of care and the amounts and things like that. So we're trying to feed that feedback up to service delivery. How do we make it easier? How do we make it clearer? And the two-way process. We're really between the two. You know, we hear from providers every minute of the day and at night, because I'll open my emails in the morning and there are emails. I think it is about communication. It's about relationships. You know, I would say that I endeavour to work closely with providers, with the Commission, with NDS to, you know, feed up. I'm a conduit. My team is a conduit about the issues and the pain points. Where we can try and resolve it. You know, what are the themes? You know, even when price guides come out, you know, some common errors occur. We're the first to hear. So we quickly let them know and say, did you realise this? So I suppose, what's my message to providers? I really hate it when my staff become, you know, the pawn, I suppose, and get unfair treatment. So, you know, respect. And, you know, staff do try and do the best. There's good and bad in everybody, in every agency, in every organisation. So, you know, please don't yell at my staff. That really gets me cranky. And, you know, can't solve a secret is the other motto. If there is an issue, that's what provider engagement's there for, to try and, you know, let us know. Is it something that's known? For example, yesterday, the request for service is currently crashed. We didn't know that until it came through from a couple of support coordinators. We immediately feed it up into the network, etc. They didn't know. So, you know, it's about communication. It's about letting us know what's not working, what are the issues. Sometimes we'll have an issue. An answer. Sometimes we don't know about the issue, we can navigate. Other times it's about clarifying. Sometimes it's directing the traffic and telling service delivery, you forgot to do the service booking. You haven't activated the service booking. Things like that. Yeah, look, yeah, variety of things, Steve. We could talk all day really in regards to how we can do and work better.
So, if the key to the market, to providers, working better with the agency, well, not with better. In key for the providers, the agency and the commission to all work together for the benefit of participants. Communication is a key, and we recognise that we're all in glass houses. Providers get it wrong. The agency pulls support coordination from call with 3 days notice. I mean, we all get communication wrong. How do you think we could improve our communication between providers, agency and the commission? What would you like to see?
Oh, look, I think these networks are invaluable, you know, to have open and honest discussions. You know, the forums we have recently run over the last few weeks, you know, they were starting with Simon and Olivia from Tassie and I doing them for Vic Tas, and all of a sudden my branch manager says, no, let's do these nationally. But, you know, our feedback was, well, actually we've missed that touch point with the providers that I'm responsible for. And yes, we're a national scheme. So, you know, somebody else facilitating these networks for us to be able to communicate and share and, you know, leave this room saying, hey, I'm actually having the same issues as Steve and Simon and Philippa, you know, that communication, bringing people together. Solution focused rather than being at war is really helpful. You know, I think, you know, where we can, and, you know, my motto to my team is, you know, as honest and as transparent as we can be. But, you know, again, sometimes, you know, there's things out there in regards to rumour and myth, and it becomes a volcano. It's rumour until it is on the website or on provider newsletters. That's my biggest advice, because there's many rumours out there. So
one of the let's touch on that a bit more, because rumours scare providers. I mean, rumours are, if you're a provider that does nothing but support coordination, a rumour that around support coordination worries whether you're going to be paying your rent. So you're saying, look, ignore rumours until they're on the website. It's really hard running a business to being an employee to do that.
Yeah, I know. I have no easy answer, because I
mean, part of communication for providers is that ability to business plan.
Yeah. I think, you know, again, it's a bit like our internal staff interpret something, say something as, you know, and it's interpreted and it goes away as fact. So, you know, we had a lot of issues with our LACs telling support coordinators, oh, you're not going to be around because of the IAs. You know, so again, that came through my team, had to go to the equivalent of my role.
I'm one of the people that put it to your team. I think there was several of us.
Yes. Hello?
Hello.
Oh, something's happened to my Zoom. Am I still on?
Yeah, we can still see and hear you.
Oh, sorry. I can't see anything. Oh, now I can. Sorry, Steve. Something really... So what was I saying? So that was a really significant pain point about staff interpreting. I mean, you know, it's been in the media about leaks, and that's probably why I have no inkling in regards to what's coming with the price guide, because I reckon it's down in a 3-bolt vault, you know, because of, you know, the perceived leaks in the agency, etc. We've got to get our messaging better for our internal and our external to be greater aligned. And that's why I sort of say, you know, it's not fact until it's on the website.
Tony, thank you for the directness of that response. Philippa, you're another conduit, the National Disability Services. What's your perspective on this discussion?
There have been times through the transition to the NDIS where it's been easier to get clarification from the agency than it is now. So many of you online would know Marianne Diamond, who worked with the agency until she retired. And she was fantastic. So in terms of, if I didn't know who would have the answer to particular provider concerns, I could call a Marianne and she would say, you need to speak to so-and-so. And sometimes these days it is quite hard to find out who will have the definitive answer, because as Tony said, you know, people interpret something and give a message and it may not actually be accurate. So in some ways I would love the agency to have a triage person for me that I could ring and say, okay, I've got this issue. It's a little obscure, but it's a real problem for these providers. Who can I talk to get a determination of what they can or can't do? Because they do go to the 1-800 number, and through that process, but they can sometimes get different answers depending on who they speak to. So, you know, if the agency could, I guess, help NDS with a triage person to, because like we have almost 1,200 members, and a lot of those queries come to us. They come to us directly or via our help desk. And sometimes it's in the agency's interest for us to be able to resolve and to, I guess, reassure providers that what they're hearing, for instance, isn't true, rather than to have a whole bunch of providers going to Tony or her counterparts around the country with the same issue. So I think it's a function of the scheme so big. There's so many providers and there are so many issues. I know the agency is doing a lot of work on I guess bedding the system down for the future. So there's been all of this focus on bringing participants into the scheme, and they're now going through reviewing now what are the settings that we want and we think should be in place, and with the hope that they won't be making as many changes to systems and processes. And I think that would be good if we get to that point where you know, I'm not monitoring the website many times a day to try and work out, you know, what changes have occurred where or what's the new information. So I've got some good contacts in the agencies on some issues. I can get, the pricing team will resolve my questions really, really quickly, but there are other issues that our providers raise that I'd love to have the best person to speak to. So I'm confident that what I send out to members is then accurate.
Thank you. So we're talking a lot about one source of truth and one trusted source of truth, and in a timely manner, and having the two, and that it is two-way conversation. And we do know that it is two-way conversation because, you know, NDS do have good relationships as a conduit to the Agency Commission and the government. And there is the Boosting Local Care Workforce program for which I work, and our direct role is to be that two-way conduit for all providers as well, as long as there is that one source of truth. You know, and Rachel's put another, there's many, I mean, and we can't spend the morning dispelling rumours, but I think what's interesting in Rachel's comment is that we know that they're moving at improvements on payments. We know that there's going to be you know, things like a high cap system are being looked into, and they will be real improvements. But of course, whenever an improvement or a change happens, I mean, the NDIS is a very special thing to participants and providers, that choice of control and that working together. And people get quite touchy around any changes. And I think if I look at the positives behind a high caps payment system, hey, that might be great. But I agree with Rachel, if I was a plan manager, I'd be nervous. So how do we manage the effective conversations and communications with each other, given that that there are those sensitivities and those changes that happen so often? So,
Steve, can I just get in there and just, you know,
Correct,
even talking about the high cap system is rumour
no,
at the moment. You know,
I'm full of it. Never listen to me.
No, I just thought, you know, again, you know, yes, we're talking about digitalisation, you know, real-time payments, etc. Is it going to be like a high cap system? I don't know. What will the role of plan management be in the future? I don't know. But keep in mind, there is an ability for plan managers to start working with participants about capacity building. So rather than transactionary, building capacity of participants to manage budget. You know, earlier in our conversation, we were talking about choice and control. A massive area of need is increasing the consumer understanding of the NDIS. We talk about provider support, we talk about provider education. One of the biggest, you know, if somebody came to me and said, Tony, what do you want to get started in the scheme? It would be about really focusing on education about what do we mean about R&M? What do we mean about choice and control? How do I use my budget? Mainstream, community, all the language we talk about. How do we ensure participants understand that? You know, and I still think that's a big area of need. You know, the role of plan managers, I think will look different. Are they going to exist? Don't know. What will their role mean? I think they will still have a role if they want to play that role. But, you know, again, saying it's going to be high caps is making a presumption that that's the direction. So I just thought I'd challenge that one.
No, thank you for correcting me. I should have used the digital term. What's the proper term? So I remember digital.
The digital market. I can't remember what I just said, but you know,
digital.
the digital
Anyway, no,
real-time payment. Real-time payment.
I will remember that. As the bloke who 10 minutes ago said language is important, I'm actually pleased you pulled me up. Real-time payments. So we know that these things do make people wonder about the future of their types of services. But Tony, I really liked how you said, well, there is that capacity building component in there. And, you know, all providers work towards getting themselves out of a job to enable and empower someone and then work with the next person who comes along. Simon, in relation to sort of that communication and that working with participants at centre, look, the Commission's got some fantastic information to assist participants in what to do if they have a concern or if they're not happy. But the participant will often go to one of their providers first and say, this other provider's done this, or, you know, what are my rights? Is there a further things you would like to see the Commission do in supporting the empowerment of participants to be more self-directed in their relationships with providers?
So I think, Steve, yes is probably the short answer. I think there's making participants aware of us and their right to complain, but before even us, because obviously we'll be, you know, to the greatest extent possible, we'd like to see any sort of issues or conflicts be resolved at the local level with the provider and the participant, hence why we have those requirements about a complaints and feedback management system, so that each provider can learn and implement sort of that continuous improvement approach from the experience that they might have with one participant. But we would, you know, we have a number of materials are available on our website for providers to distribute to participants. There is a participant pack that is able to be ordered from the Commission's website. There is our Speak Up campaign and collateral that is available to providers that they can put up in their facilities or in their settings as appropriate to the supports that they deliver. But yeah, so we obviously, I mean, we can take a complaint from anyone. It can be a member of the public, a provider, a participant, and there is no pre-requirement for that participant to have lodged the complaint with the provider. So we, you know, are very encouraging for participants to be aware of us, but also to be aware of and our standards that talk to that expectation in the practice standards, and then of course the quality indicators under that around complaints management that a provider will have in multiple points through the standards, I should add. It's woven in that expectation and understanding of complaints handling and, you know, dare I say, dispute resolution is built into the expectation of how supports are delivered and participants engaged with through that process. And of course, that's variable depending on the type. We talked about the continuum earlier. If it's the purchase of a wheelchair versus, pretty intimate type care arrangements in a person's home, for instance.
Thank you. And we're wrapping up soon because I'm aware we're out of time. But one question I get a lot from providers, Simon, is if a participant comes to them and says, hey, I want a worker of a particular skin colour with a particular first language or a particular culture, or a participant comes to them and says, oh, I want you to do this. It's not really within the law. I know you're unregistered, but when my son, who I'm nominee for, is naughty, just lock him in the room for 10 minutes. If a provider has concerns about some of the legal requests of participants, what can they do? What should they do?
Look, it's a really good question, and it's a really complex question. So I'm not sure I'm going to be able to answer for every scenario. But what I will say is that a provider that is being asked to do something that's unlawful should absolutely engage with the appropriate authorities, and if that's us, should do so, reach out to us in relation to what's being requested of them. And I think the example you used there was restrictive practices. So we can work through what that looks like based on the context and the situation specifically. So what was the first example you used, Steve? Sorry.
A participant requesting that they only want workers who have a particular first language or a particular gender or a particular skin colour.
Yeah, so look, that's a really common request, and I think that becomes quite complex depending on, the workforce issue that would intersect with that. So the point I'd make is it's really about communication with that individual and that participant around, to the extent that you're able to meet what their wishes or their preferences are. But we would expect, the Commission would expect that conversation is a very rich one, and it's an ongoing one about the opportunity to meet those needs for that participant. Of course, the participant will always be able to, if they think they are able to meet that need via another avenue, exercise their choice and control in that space, but it would be always around how that communication is undertaken by the provider with the participant to talk through the limitations that the provider might be having, because we can't manufacture particular preferences where they're not available in a particular marketplace. But I think it's important that I don't want to under talk to this point, because some of those preferences are based on experiences of trauma, and so therefore they can be triggers for people, and they really need to be worked through with the participant about how best to support them to the extent they can. So it might not be a person who is from a particular religious background or speak a particular language, but it may also be part of the way it might be a male-female type issue as well. So some of these things
there could absolutely be experiential and cultural and life experience reasons why there is a valid service request, but of course the provider needs to discern whether it is a valid service request or not. Tony, do you have any thoughts around this space?
I always have thoughts, Steve. Always gets me in trouble. Look, I'll concur rather than, keep it going. I'll concur with what Simon said and, report if there is concerns about safety and what's being required to be delivered, liaise with the Commission. Safety is paramount. We all want that. So the Commission are there to support those concerns.
Yeah, it's just, Tony, I'll just add to it because I probably didn't make the point. If it is intersecting with other law enforcement, the Commission isn't the central body for everything. If it's, child protection, or if it's, the Commission for Children and Young People in Victoria, and you've got mandatory reporting obligations, we don't trump those. They still exist they coexist with us.
Simon, we've got 5 minutes to go, and you've just reminded me we haven't even touched on interface with state jurisdictions and state agencies. We're not going to get a chance to. I do like the fact that you do have on your website the links to some of the relevant state agencies, not all of them. We have 4 minutes to go. Philippa, what are your final observations or key points you would like to say to providers?
Look, I'll focus briefly on pricing. It's the thing that I hear from our members constantly, and the agency will release its new price guide, as Tony said, by the end of the month or within days thereafter. The two biggest price issues that we've been pursuing with the pricing team in the agency and with the Minister and the Minister's advisor and the like are group prices. So people on the line will recall that last year the price guide to be implemented from July required providers to separate out direct support and indirect support and claim separately for them. And we managed to get a stay on that for 12 months. We've been working very hard and to try and get that stay extended for another month. So another year, to give providers another year to transition so that they can use one pricing system or the other for group supports. I don't know where things will land, but the NDIA board is meeting next week and they'll sign off on the prices to be released. I can assure you that the Minister knows about the issue and the Minister's advisor knows about the issue. And so I haven't given up hope that they will allow that extra year's transition. So as soon as we see the price guide, we'll be looking at it and be getting info out to you. The other real pain point is SIL prices. I won't go into all the problems there. You know, we responded to the consultation process. We talk with Jerry Mitra in the agency about SIL prices every single week. Every time we talk with the pricing group, we're talking SIL prices. I don't know whether the agency is going to move on those. I do know that the strong message from Martin Hoffman is about cost containment, and it's about slowing the growth of the costs of the expenditure of the scheme. So whether we can get one or either of those two important issues over the line for the 1st of July, we'll know within days.
Tony, your final thoughts or key points?
I feel like I need to say, hang in there. I think, you know, all the issues that Philip has raised, you know, the process issues, I still, you know, maybe I'm an eternal optimist, but I still feel that the cogwheels are moving in the right direction. They still need squeaking. You know, I think the scheme will look different in 12 months, hopefully for the better. I think clarity and communication is going to keep us all going. So look, you know, as I said, I'm heading off for some extended leave. I anticipate when I get back in August, things will start looking different, and I'll need probably a holiday to recover from the holiday and the updates and changes. You know, what else? Look, the website, provider news, using your provider engagement contacts, you know, provider.support@ndis.gov.au, because they can help channel if you don't know a specific email address. Yeah, look, I don't know what else, Steve.
Fair enough. Simon.
Thanks, Steve. Just a couple of quick things. I mean, the Commission in Victoria is now coming up to 2 years old. We do publish annual compliance priorities. So we are starting now as to move, you know, where appropriate from an education footing, much more into testing the level of compliance for providers. And we've run a couple of national programs that you may have been intersected with already. So just to be aware, encourage you to engage with those materials I've referenced today. And, my office is always available should you need to unpack things specifically. The other thing I wanted to just mention quickly is worker screening clearance checks. I know that people are experiencing some delays. We're reassured by the big government, who actually is the owner of the worker screening unit, feeds into the national database that the Commission maintains. Just make sure, just a tip to make sure you're associating to your workers that are in the clearance process, because if you haven't done that, it will delay them. So just encourage you to do that. That's about it from me, Steve. Thanks very much, everyone, for your time.
My top tip is obviously to engage with the Eastern Disability Services Network for their events and webinars, and to engage with your local regional coordinator from the Boosting Local Care Workforce program. Our job is to provide you with support, resources and feedback your issues. So I think engagement is a big tip, and hopefully that two-way conversation. I would like to thank everyone for attending. I would especially like to thank Philippa, Simon and Tony for their very open and constructive communication. And I look forward to seeing you all later in the year at EDSN's next webinar. Thank you and have a lovely day.
Thank you.